Efendim hoş geldiniz. Çok
Welcome
teşekkürler ederiz.
to everyone.
Size
We'd like
bugün
to thank you
yaz
for your
programımızın sonu
attendance.
olarak
This is
çok
the
çok
last
sevgili
one of
öğrencimiz,
our summer program. Our very dear, beloved student, one of the most favorite professors of United States, Mr. Omid Safi, who is a professor of Sufism of Persian origin, a US citizen. Mr. Omid Safi. Omid will tell us about a topic which is exactly like himself. He's going to tell us about the Allah aşkı. He is a very long-standing student with me. There's no way that I can tell his beauty to you in words. He's actually reached the level of the makam of insan, not only with his ilim, with his science, but also with his behaviors and attitudes as a role model. They wanted me to make a speech, and actually I want to read something really interesting. I received a letter from a jail today. One of our students, who is a general, is being jailed for the last 26 months for certain reasons, and I received a letter from him, and he says, I am praying for him every night so that he will be freed. Now I'm reading this letter with the embarrassment of that prayer. God Almighty has taken me for training. Let God allow me to benefit from this. Mevlana says, whoever asks for falah must give advice to his nefs, must make him used to zuhd. Zuhd first allows us to get rid of the haram, and then the shubha, and then the mubah, and also it's leaving the mutlak helal. So there is nothing that isn't given up. This is about leaving, giving up, breaking the relationship with everything, the hal, the maqam, the status, everything other than the ruler of the universe. And Hazreti Ali says, whoever teaches me a letter, I will be a slave to him for 40 years. And we can only find no one at the door of the arts and lack. This is the condition of Islam. La ilaha illallah. There is God and nothing else. So in every prayer, every minute we spend away from my family, I hope will allow my family's emotional and spiritual improvement. And this is the letter. And also he says, Mevlana says, the troubles are the guests that our beloved sends us, our lover sends us. The issue is showing the patience and to go through them. God willing, our problem will also fade away. Let God not keep us away from patience. And then he says, I looked at the photos of my family and I remembered how beautiful they are. God Almighty, Allah is Husn-ü Mutlak, and every husn is kudret, and watching that is prayer. And he says, I am grateful to God for my position, even under these conditions. This is a clear reflection of how certain positions can affect people in a terrible way, yet very positively for some others. And I was embarrassed, ashamed of myself. I wish God Almighty allows us to act, to behave like this person does. My dear son, beloved son, Omid Safi, I would like to ask you to the stage now.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Well, if I were a real Sufi, I would just say wassalam and go home, because there is nothing to be said after that. But since we're also academics, perhaps a few words may be said. Thank you. Güzel. Tamam. So if I may, I'd like to begin with a lovely story. And this story comes to us from the great Sheikh Fariduddin Attar. It is a story that he tells us from the earlier Sufi, Zulnoon Mesri. And Zulnoon has a dream one night in which he sees himself standing before Allah, along with all of the human beings who have ever been, all the human beings who are, and all of those who will be. And they hear the voice of Allah coming to them, saying to them, "Who here wishes to attain to the sum total of all the worldly pleasures?" And about 90% of the people who are there raise their hands very joyfully, and they hear the voice of God coming to them saying, "It is granted unto you. It is yours." And they're very happy and they leave. Then they hear the voice of God coming a second time. "Who here wishes to be spared all pain? There will be no pain, no suffering, and no hellfire. Who here wishes to attain to that?" So of those who are left, about 90% raise their hand. And again they hear the voice of God, "It is granted unto you." And they're quite happy and they leave. There's a small crowd left. And then they hear the voice of God a third time. "Who here wishes to attain to my loftiest paradise, a garden that no eye has ever seen and no words have ever described?" About 90% of those who are there, like, lofty garden, luminous paradise, sounds great. So they raise their hand and they leave. And then there's just a very small handful of people left. And this time they hear the voice of God thundering at them, saying, "I offered you every worldly pleasure, you took it not. I gave you a chance to live free from pain and suffering and hellfire, and you chose it not. I gave you my loftiest paradise, and you chose it not. What are you here for?" And Attar says that this handful of people who are left bow their head in humility, and they say, "You know better that we did not come to be spared suffering. We didn't come for paradise. We came for you." And then one last time they hear the voice of Allah coming to them in gentleness, saying, "In that case, I am yours. I am yours." The group of friends, the friends of God, these saintly beings that we're going to be talking about, are the ones, a handful of people in this broad ocean of Islam, who have always been in love with God for the sake of God, above and beyond trying to avoid hellfire, or even for the sake of promise of a paradise. These are the ones who love the gardener more than they love the garden. And there's a name that has been given to them. These are the radical lovers, as I've translated the term ashq. Ashq. In Turkish, eshq in Persian and Arabic. And they spoke of themselves as having a path, a madhab. We usually think of the term madhab as following the Hanafi madhab, the Shafi'i madhab, even, astaghfirullah, the Hanbali madhab these days, the Maliki madhab, the Jafari madhab, but their madhab is the madhab of love itself, Madhab-e Eshq. And of course, this is a term that we hear throughout the tradition. We have had echoes of this earlier. Most of you, I know, are familiar with the stories of Rabia, famously walking through the city, running through the bazaar, with a lit torch in one hand and a vase in the other hand, to quench the fires of hell and to burn down paradise, so that people have nothing left other than the face of Allah. As she says, if I'm worshiping you for your own sake, then do not withhold from me your eternal beauty. Your eternal beauty. The term that we have in the Quran is hubb, or in a variation, mahabba or muhibbat. So here, of course, is the ayah that we see the radical lovers root themselves in, ground themselves in. Yuhibbuhum wa yuhibbunahu. God loves them. There are a people that God loves them, and they love God. These two, the divine love for humanity and humanity's love for Allah, are brought together. And yuhibbuhum is mentioned first. God loving us comes first. We wouldn't be able to have love for each other, and we wouldn't even be able to love Allah if we were not loved first. And the great Ahmad Ghazali, whom we'll talk about in just a second, when he's offering his interpretation of this verse, he says that the nuqta, the dot, that the dot under the letter B in yuhibbuhum, he loves them, is planted in the fertile soil of we love God. That the love that we experience comes from the same root as that divine love. He says it is of the same essence, of the same color, hamrang in his language. The Quranic words that are used for love are the words dealing with hubb. This loving kindness that if you read the writings of the early Sufis, one of them says it might come from the word for bubbles. And you might have wondered what bubbles have to do with love. They say it's like if you take a pot of water and you put it on a flame. You're slowly heating up a kettle to make chai or something. And if you stand over it and you look down, as the water heats up, you begin to see the little air pockets that are already in the water. And these air pockets become visible at the bottom of the pot. And they start finding each other. The little bubbles gravitate towards each other. They join. As the water heats up, as the fire of love is burning, these pockets of air become excited, become agitated, and they begin rising through the water until they get to the surface and they pop. When they pop, the air in the water joins the air that's in the air. And they say, this is loving kindness. This is hubb. We come together and you see a friend, like I just saw my dear friend Mahmoud, right? He's a friend that I have loved for more than 20 years. So when I see him, this loving kindness forms deep, deep, deep in my heart, and he gets excited. He gets agitated. A love bubble forms, and the love bubble rises until it shows up as a loving glance, as one loving word, as one touch. Mahmoud Jan, it is great to see you, right? The bubble cannot be contained anymore. It has to pop as an expression. And they say this too is the same way with Allah. That Allah loved humanity too much for this love bubble to remain inside Allah. Right? He was a hidden treasure, kuntu kanzan makhfiyan, and this love bubble had to pop. And that popping, the joining with the air, the joining of love with love, is what we call creation. But this is still hubb. This is still loving kindness. Eshq is something different. Eshq is more radical. That's the reason that this collection is one that I've translated, Radical Love. Eshq is a fire that burns. Eshq is extreme. Eshq is radical. In that sense, the word radical in the origin meant the root of something. So when we hear Maulana, Hazrat Mevlana, say in the beginning of the Masnavi, هذا كتاب المثنوي وهو أصول الدين, it is the root of the root of the root of the faith, you could just as easily translate that beginning line of the Masnavi as, this is the book of the Masnavi, and this is some radical, radical, radical stuff. Right? You're really going to the root of things. You're really going to the heart of things. Eshq, for them, was like an ivy, ashaqa. It is an ivy that wraps itself around a tree, that sticks its tentacles into it, derives nutrients from it so that the ivy grows, and eventually the tree dies. And many of us, including many of my students, when they hear this story, they're like, you can keep your eshq, because I don't want to die. I want to have a happy life. Right? They don't have a hard time understanding the love stories in which Layla and Majnun die, Romeo and Juliet die, Farhad and Shireen die. But the problem is that they keep thinking of Layla and Majnun as these characters, as these persons outside. No. We are Layla and we are Majnun. We are Farhad and we are Shireen. And the we that has to die, the tree that has to become embraced in radical love, that we is not really you. That we is your ego. That we is your selfishness. It's the part of you that has 3 favorite people in the world, and it's me, myself, and I. Love changes the direction. Love says, it is not about me, it's about you. You direct yourself in love towards someone else. And if you're sitting here today and listening, the reason you're alive is because you have been loved. And not only loved by Allah, loved by someone who every night made that most courageous of choices. It was to wake up in the middle of the night when she hasn't had a solid night of sleep for 1.5 years, and to put your welfare, your happiness, ahead of her own sleep, ahead of her own rest. That maternal eshq is the only reason any of us are alive. And what she didn't do was she didn't think like a businessman. She didn't make a list of the reasons for me to get sleep and the reason to let this child cry herself to sleep. No, when she heard the baby cry, she rose, she leaps to action to pick up the child and comfort her. The ego has been left, and because you're rising above the ego, love manifests. This is exactly what many of our radical lovers say in these classical Sufi texts. One of them, named Khaja Abdullah Ansari, a great mystic from what is today Afghanistan, says, he has a poem, it's called Forgive Freely. Forgive freely. He says, my God, you created freely. Give me my rizq, give me my sustenance freely. So forgive freely. You are God, not an accountant. Right? Not an accountant. Part of what the radical lovers do is they're taking the very vertical relationship based on transcendence, based on the notion of God as the king and us as the subject. That relationship never disappears, but they're adding to it a dimension, which is lover and beloved, ashiq and mashuk, or in their language, simply dost, friend. God is still the king, we're still the subject, but then there's this dimension of friendship. One of the early Sufis, when he said, what is the path, the Sufi path? He says, ba khuda rahat budan, to be at ease with God. To be at ease with God. Another one says, when I'm in public, I call you king. I call you Lord. When I'm in private, I call you beloved. Shibli, the great mystic, says, imagine how comfortable, how loved, how protected, how nurtured you felt when you were in your mother's lap. He said, to be a mystic is like being a child in the lap of Allah. However safe and secure and loved you felt that way. Most of us are familiar with some of the great Sufis of the path of love, people like Hazrat Mevlana, Attar, and I've translated many of their poems and teachings in this book, but I also wanted to include lesser known Sufis. Sufis that today, in some ways, are not as well known as they perhaps need to be. And one of my favorite ones is Harakani in Turkish. And Harakani is one of the great examples of someone that has this very loving relationship with Allah, having transcended his own ego. I wonder if we have an image of Harakani here from some contemporary paintings. People ask him, where do you see God? Where do you see God? And he said, wherever I don't see myself. And the stories that we have from Harakani are quite humorous. These are people who routinely have these experiences of speaking with God. And so Harakani has a dream in which he hears the voice of God, and God says to him, he doesn't even address him by his proper name, he's just called Bul Hassana, Hassan's daddy. Bul Hassana, do you want me to go and tell people what a hypocrite you are? Do you want me to reveal everything wrong that you do? You say one thing with your lips, but you live another. You act this way, but there's something else in your heart. And Kharaqani doesn't miss a beat. He talks back to God the way that you would never do to a king, but you would to a beloved. And he says, Bar Ilaha, my Lord, do you want me to go and tell people everything that I know about you? Do you want me to go and tell them that you love your creation more than a mother loves her newborn child? And if I do, not a single one of them would pray or fast because they would have nothing to fear from you. And Attar says, there was a long silence, and the voice of God comes back and says, how about I say nothing, you say nothing, right? Nazman vanazto. I say nothing, you say nothing. Now, this is not some hippie story. This is not something that people made up in California in the 1960s. This is a story from the very heart of our tradition, more than 1,000 years ago. And in some ways, we have to ask ourselves the question, where is the ishq? Where is the love? Are we living this path of love today? We might have to do some resurrecting of this ishq today. When the great masters, such as Ahmad Ghazali, who's depicted on the right, writes his great masterpiece on ishq. This is a beautiful book that I know has been translated into English. I think there's a good Turkish translation of it as well, called the Savaneh. Savaneh. He makes a very bold claim. Before the time of Ahmad Ghazali, the Sufis used to say there's two kinds of love. There's ishq haqiqi and ishq majazi. There's real love, and real love belongs only to God. And then there is this metaphorical love, symbolic love. That's the love that we as humans have for each other. For the earlier Sufis, they said the goal is to learn the language of love, learn the alphabet of love, so that we can rise above it and love the goal, who is God. That notion never entirely goes away, just like the notion of God as the king never entirely goes away, but Ahmad adds something new. Ahmad Ghazali says in the beginning of his Savaneh, a very dear brother came to me and he begged me to write him a book, and a book on ishq. I didn't want to write for him because ishq is not something that you can read about in a book. Ishq is something that you have to experience. But he begged and he pleaded and he impressed upon me our friendship. And I relented. I agreed. And I said, I'll write you a book on ishq on one condition: that you do not differentiate between the love of God and the love of humanity. There is, if any of you have grown up listening to reggae music and Bob Marley, the Sufis were Bob Marley 1,000 years before. There is one love. There is one love. If you claim to want to love God, you have to learn to love humanity. There is no such thing as claiming to be a lover of God and being someone who's cruel to human beings. And Ghazali is very specific on this notion that the path to Allah goes right through humanity. God is easy. What has God ever done to you other than make you in love, sustain you in love, and resurrect you in love? It's these two-legged creatures who are difficult. This notion of love as being something that is more than just mere sentimentality is one of the insights that we get from the path of love. When they speak about Eshq, they're very clear that Eshq is not an emotion. Eshq is not a feeling. You don't feel Eshq towards someone. Eshq is the very unleashing of God onto the cosmos. It's the very eruption of God. It is this cosmic current that flows out of the divine, brings you into creation, and if we can learn to merge with it, the same river will carry you back home. Maulana has a wonderful poem, Man Ghulam Qamaram, I serve this moon-like beauty. Juz qamar be man hich magu. Don't talk to me unless it's about this beauty that I love. This is one that I've translated as say nothing, hich magu. He's describing his experience that one night, he experiences love manifesting to him as this luminous form. And he's trying to figure out who this is. Who is this love? So he says, last night I became love-crazed. Love saw me and said, I've come. Don't shout. Say nothing. I said, love, I'm afraid of something else. Love said, there is nothing else. Say nothing. There is nothing other than Eshq. Let me whisper secrets in your ear. Say nothing. At this point, Maulana is figuring out, okay, so what is this? And so he says, what a beauty. Are you an angel? Are you human? Love says, not an angel, not a human. Say nothing. So now Maulana is having a complete freak out. I said, what is this? Say it. If you're not an angel and you're not human, what's left? Love said, hush, khamush. Stay like this. Say nothing. I said, my heart, isn't this divine? Isn't this God's quality? Love said, yes, my child, but hush, say nothing. Yeah, this notion that this Eshq is not just simply an emoji. You don't text Eshq to someone. You don't SMS text Eshq to someone. You burn in Eshq. And whatever there is of selfishness in all of us has to burn away so that the only thing that remains are these divine qualities. One of the points that also I think deserves to be said is that in this same tradition, since love is not just an emotion, if you have to love God through loving people, if you burn in Eshq, it changes the way that you relate to people. So many mystical traditions, including the Islamic, including the Christian ones, say all that we mean by justice, adl, idalat, is love when it comes into public. This whole language of justice, and so many of us are interested in the question of how do we create a just human society, all that we mean by it is ishq when it moves into the public arena. I love my children more than my own life itself. I would gladly give up my own life for my children. I think almost all of us here feel that way about our children, maybe not in their teenage years, but before and after. What we mean by justice is simply the recognition that other people love their children, their babies, as much as we love ours. A just human society is one in which we would never do to other people's children what we wouldn't want to have done to our own children. We wouldn't bomb them, we wouldn't oppress them, we wouldn't starve them, we wouldn't drive them out of their homes, we wouldn't abuse them. So love, ishq, when it moves outward, we call it justice. And one of my own teachers said, the same ishq, when it moves inward, we call it tenderness. Tenderness. That people who are loving can be fierce advocates for justice out in the world, but in terms of their dealing with the human beings around them, there has to be gentleness. You can't bulldoze the people around you in the name of love and justice. This same love is something that has the power to transform, to cook, and to redeem. Maulana says at one point that in the day of judgment, all of one's deeds will be brought on the cosmic scale. All of your good deeds and your bad deeds. Right? We know this mizan, this scale language. And he says, prayers, fasting, charity are all brought and they're put on the scale. Then love will be brought forth. But love doesn't fit, even in that scale. Love is too grand. Love tips the scale over. And since this ishq is not just sentimentality, and it's God spilling over, some of the Sufis say that every motion that we see around us is through ishq. Attar has a poem that says, the ocean's commotion is because of yearning for God. It is the fire of love that whips water into frenzied wave. And of course, he's playing here with this metaphor of fire and water, right? Opposites come together in ishq. This same love, this same ishq, is one that slowly, yavash yavash, as we would say here, transforms the human being. So the goal is, can our eyes be transformed so that the glance that we cast at one another is a loving glance? Can our speech be transformed so that the words that we speak are loving words? Can our touch be transformed so that as we touch one another, it is only a touch that comforts? One of the signs of how much work we have left to do to remember these teachings, I just came from taking a group of people to Cappadocia, and you see these wonderful, beautiful, photogenic trees that are covered with nazar. And every shop in Istanbul that you go to sells nazar amulets and nazar necklaces, and if you ever come with a baby, people will hang 50 nazars on your child. And you ask people, what is this? And they say, evil eye. Nazar was not evil eye. The word nazar in this context meant a love glance. A love glance. It is the glance that is through Eshq. We would only look at one another the way that Allah would look at us. We have somehow kept the notion of an evil glance, a jealous glance, but most of us don't really have the word and the concept for a loving glance, right? So we have to go back and remember some of these teachings. When we come across people who embody this kind of a tradition, they change our ideas about what it means to be human, and they change our ideas about God. Many of you know much more about Hazrat Maulana than I do, and alhamdulillah, you have got wonderful teachers here who can teach about the Masnavi and about Ibn Arabi. How rare it is for us to be at an institute of Sufism. What a special opportunity you have, and may this continue to deepen and widen and sweeten. We know that when Hazrat Maulana is teaching in Konya, that Konya in many ways in the 1200s has some of the same elements as a city like New York or Istanbul today. There were Turks, there were Persians, there were Greeks, there were Armenians, there were Jews, there were Arabs, all together. It's being led by Anatolian Seljuks, and the language, the administrative language of the court is Persian. So we're not going to have the discussion of is Maulana a Turk or an Iranian, because this is a love talk. But we know that he comes from a Persian-speaking part of the world, and he arrives here. And as he's giving his sohbats, there's all kinds of people from Konya who come to listen to him. You got Persians, you got Turks, you got Greeks, you got Arabs, you got Jews. And as people stayed around him, if they really wanted to understand his poetry and his teaching, they would start to learn more and more Persian. Some of us have had to learn Biraz Turkçe, and we keep still making mistakes in it. Learning a new language is difficult. Learning a new language in poetry is quite a challenge. So I'm very attracted to those students of Maulana who were not Persian speakers. I want to know, how did they experience being in a setting where the whole thing is new and the language is new? So there's a Greek man that I'm very fond of named Syrianus. Syrianus loves Hazrat Maulana. He comes to listen to Hazrat Maulana every chance that he gets, and he's given the name Ala-ed-Din, Aladdin, and he converts to Islam, and he's trying to learn Persian. But he keeps messing it up. He's sort of a comic character, and he keeps using the wrong words. So for example, you know from the Mevlevi sources that Maulana was called Hazrat Khudavandigar, more or less meaning His Holiness. The word Khudavandigar is something like small l Lord in English. You can be the Lord of a castle. You can be Lord such and such. But there's another similar sounding word, Khuda, which means capital L, Lord, God. And Syrianus keeps calling Maulana Khuda instead of Khudavandigar, capital L, Lord, instead of small l, Lord, and he keeps getting into trouble. Right? There's a group of very dry, legalistic, today we might call them fundamentalist types, and they're like, this infidel, this kafir, he called Maulana Khuda, God. They drag him in front of a judge. they're like, he's committed heresy. We should execute him. And the judge apparently has a sense of fairness and justice. He's like, now, my son, this is an old man. He was born and he will die. Surely you don't think that he was God. And Syrianus is like, I always do this. No, you're right. I didn't mean to call him Khuda. I didn't mean to call him God. And the judge is like, all right, let's everyone relax. We're not going to execute anyone today. What did you mean to say, my son? And Syrianus says, I meant to call him Khuda Saz, God maker. And the fundamentalists are agitated again, and they're like, we will crucify him, and then we will burn him, and then we will spread his ashes. And the judge is like, my son, if he is not God, how can he be the maker of God? And Syrianus for a second time is like, I always do this. Persian is so hard. I always use the wrong word. And here's the key part. When I said that he is Khuda Saz, God maker, what I meant to say is that he makes God real to me. He makes God real to me. He says, before I met him, God was a word on a page. He was an idea in my head. Now that I have seen this love, I know that God must be real. Because there is one love, when we meet women and men, and how blessed to be in a place that you can study with women and men like this, when you meet them, they remind you of what we're supposed to be as human beings, and that God must be real. God must be real. It also changes our notion of when we can be with God. Right? People keep talking about the afterlife. And these radical lovers are a little more impatient. They want God here and now. They want to have this face-to-face, heart-to-heart loving relationship. So this again is another poem from Maulana. He says, paradise will be exalted, they say. Fine wine, a beautiful beloved, they say. Here and now, we are intoxicated, cuddling with my beloved. So it is now as it shall be then. It is now as it shall be then. Keep in mind that Persian doesn't have any capital letters, and it didn't have any gendered pronouns. So when he's saying, cuddling with my beloved, he means my wife, my sheikh, Hazrat Payghambar, God, and he probably means them all simultaneously. Okay? This is a one love tradition that refuses bifurcation, refuses either or, refuses that sense. You all have had many, many opportunities to study Rumi's masterpiece, the Masnavi. How lovely it is to remember that for them, this is the map of the path of love that we all have to follow together. It's this extraordinary gift that has come to be manifested in this part of the world that teaches us about the root of the root of the faith, the core of the core of the core of the faith. It's a tree metaphor. If your deen, your religion, is a tree, this is the root of the root of the root. And Rumi and the Path of Love invite us to always think about, what do the roots of a tree do? The root anchors you. It grounds you. Because in life, there will be storms. There will be violent storms that uproot many trees. Are you rooted? Are you grounded? And what have you grounded yourself in? If you've grounded yourself through your wealth, what if your wealth disappears? If you've grounded yourself in your good name, what if the people turn against you? If you've grounded yourself in having a beautiful family, what if your family dissolves? What is it that anchors the thing that you have anchored yourself in? And of course, for Maulana, it is this path of love. The tree and the root metaphor has another purpose. The roots are also what sustain the tree. It's where the nutrients are absorbed into the tree, and without it, the tree is going to become withered. It's going to stop giving fruit. It will get dry, it will get brittle, and eventually it will die. Maulana is telling you, don't be a dry tree. It's not enough to be religious. Have a moistness to it. Have a tenderness to it. Have a sweetness to it. A tree that is giving you sweet flowers, sweet fruit. And of course, for Maulana, the sweeter the fruit, the more the tree bends over, the humbler it gets. That's why Maulana says, in the tree of prophets, our Hazrat Payghambar is the sweetest and the earthiest, khaki tarin, because he's been on the tree of prophethood the longest, so his fruit is the juiciest, it's the heaviest, and that's why he's the most humble of the prophets. He's the one that's the cause of creation. He is the cause of وَلَوْلَاكَ مَا خَلَقْتُ. The entire cosmos is created for him, and he's the humble prophet. Since we're here with Jamal Noor, I'll tell you one story that I don't often read, but it's given my immense respect for Jamal Noor Hoja, who in many ways is not just an extraordinary researcher, but also a spiritual mother to so many of us. Attar tells a wonderful way of understanding this title that is always used for the prophet, An-Nabi al-Ummi. An-Nabi al-Ummi, which usually gets translated as the unlettered prophet, that the prophet did not receive mere human knowledge. The prophet didn't receive mere human knowledge. Well, the word Ummi comes from the word meaning mother. So Attar tells a story of a mother who's walking by a river. She's holding her newborn child, and the child falls out of her hand into the river, and the river is carrying the child away. The mother is in deep anguish, and she looks ahead, and the river is heading towards a mill, a stone mill that is turning to crush wheat, and her child is heading towards this mill. Not only might her child drown, the child might also be crushed by this mill. She is beside herself, jumps in somehow to save this child, this crying child, brings the child to the shore, and she does the one thing that she can do to comfort the child. She takes her breast and puts it in this crying child's mouth. And the baby suckles, nurses, and is comforted. So it begins with a very tender story, and then he switches, and he starts addressing the Prophet. And he says, you are the Nabi al-Ummi, look at your community. Look at the wretched state of your community. Shir deh ma ra ze pestan karam. O Messenger of God, nurse us from the breast of generosity. Right? So the Prophet that he's talking about, this is not a physical breast that we're speaking of. He's speaking about the Prophet who is maternal and whose love for the community comforts people who are in anguish. I'm mindful of time and having some time left for questions, so with your permission, we will start to wrap it up and open it up for some questions. Keep in mind that in the Ottoman tradition, these teachings were so essential that at another level, it was seen as transcending time and space. Here is a wonderful illuminated manuscript that we have showing the lives of Maulana and his community, the Manaqib al-Arifin. This was produced in Baghdad in the late 16th century, and it shows in heaven the Prophet teaching the Masnavi. Whatever one thinks of the historicity of these kind of things, surely there's some notion that Maulana, who is of course called Farzand Jan Mustafa, the offspring of the soul of the Prophet, is connected in that deep, deep sense to the Prophet himself. I'm going to end by reading you two more short poems. One of them is that if you're familiar with the Masnavi, you know that in the very beginning pages, when Maulana is telling you the story of the king and the maiden and the smith, he makes the mistake of mentioning the word for sunshine, aftab, and this leads him to an ecstatic experience where the name of Shams starts to be mentioned more and more, and he loses control of the narrative. The king is gone, the maiden is gone, the smith is gone. But the one insight that he leaves us with is about Eshq. He says, Eshq astrolab asrar khudast. This radical love is an astrolabe for the heart secrets of God. It's an astrolabe for the heart secrets of God, and the astrolabe was a device that you would hold up to orient yourself when you're lost. In today's language, we would call it the GPS. Love, radical love, Eshq, is the GPS to find the heart of God. And you use a GPS when you're lost. And Maulana's point is that we are all lost. We act as if we have our act together, but in reality, not only do we not know where we want to go, we don't even know where we are. But there is this built-in remedy, and the remedy is Eshq. The remedy is love. And I'll remind you that when you go to Konya, and I've just come back from there 3 days ago, and as you begin to enter Huzur Pir, the shrine of Hazrat Maulana, you look up And right underneath the beautiful calligraphy of Ya Hazrat Maulana, written by Muhammad Sadiq, there's that short little poem, which is also repeated in Ajmer Sharif at the entrance to the Dargah of Khaja Moinuddin Chishti, the great South Asian Chishti saint. What does it say? Ka'batul Ushaq bashad in maqam, har ke naqis amad inja shud tamam. This maqam, this station, this place is like a Kaaba for the radical lovers. Har ke naqis amad inja. Whoever comes here broken and incomplete leaves tamam, leaves whole and complete. And the part of this invitation that I think is a crucial part of the path of love is that you don't come to the Kaaba of lovers because you're already illuminated. You don't come to the path of love because you're already experiencing that intimacy with God. You come precisely because you are broken and incomplete, naqis. This is a path for the brokenhearted. The starting point of the path is where we are. All of us who come incomplete, carrying our pain, carrying our suffering, carrying our incompleteness, but this is a path which has the gift of alchemy. It is a path that offers genuine healing for all that makes us human, and the goal is to end up tamam, to end up complete, so that when someone then meets you at that state, as we meet these characters in these poems, the question that they will ask you is not, who are you? They ask the same questions that my students kept asking about Jamal Nur Hoja after meeting her. What are you? What is this person? Why haven't we met people like this before? This is the promise of the path of love, path of radical love, and I'm very grateful to have had a chance to share just a few minutes of it with you, and thank you to the rector of the university, thank you to Jamal Nur Hoja, thank you to my dear friend Mahmoud Errol Kilic, and my other friends Bruce Lawrence and Miriam Cook, Jangwizel, Elif, and all of you for creating this space for us to be together. I'm at your service. If the etiquette and adab of this place is to have a few minutes for questions, I'm happy to do that. And if not, I'm also happy to become khamosh and hush and say nothing.
Thank you very much. Efendim 10 dakikalık soru sorma süremiz var. 10 dakika içerisinde sorularınız varsa buyurunuz lütfen. Şimdi vaktidir. Dr. Safi, thank you very much for this beautiful talk. We always appreciate to have you. Inshallah you will come often. And we have only 10 minutes for questions. Thank you. Var mıdır efendim? Mikrofon getirecek arkadaşlarımız. İstirak aleminde herkes aşkın içerisinde galiba. Sorular bitti. Cemal Nur Hocam siz buyursanız efendim.
Konu aşk olunca soru moru kalmıyor. Ben de bu kadar güzel aşk anlatımını tekrar duyduğum için çok seviniyorum. Omid'e çok teşekkür ediyorum.
Ben teşekkür ederim hocam.
Hakiki insan olma yolunda bize çok örnek şeyler söyledi. Allah tamamlanmayı nasip etsin. Mevlana Hazretleri'nin bir sözü var. Diyor ki, insanı Allah'tan ayıran iki şey vardır. Biri parası, diğeri sıhhati. Demek ki eksik olunca Allah sizi kabul ediyor ve tamamlanıyoruz. O bakımdan teşekkür ediyorum oğlum, teşekkür ediyorum. Hislerimize anlattığın en güzel şekilde Allah tamamlanmayı nasip etsin canım.
Ben de çok teşekkür ederim. Çok faydalı oldu, ufuk açıcı oldu. Hazreti Mevlana'nın bir sözünü hatırlıyorum. Bununla ilgili yorumunuzu merak ediyorum. Kalp aklın esiri, akıl da ruhun esiri diyor. Bu konuda ne düşünüyorsunuz?
Oh. Oh. Well, I don't know so much about the slave language, but I am reminded of the metaphor that Maulana uses for Miraj, where he's giving us the story of Hazrat Payghambar going on the Mi'raj with Jibreel, and Jibreel brings Hazrat Payghambar right to the divine presence, and there he stops and he says, I can't go any further. If I went any further, my feathers, my wings would burn. But you, Muhammad, since you are Ashq, you are Rahmat, Rahmat can enter into Rahmat, Ashq can enter into Ashq. And of course, for so many of the Muslims, the angels are sometimes described as being made out of nur, and for the philosophers, they're made out of aql. Right? As I understand that story, it's almost a metaphor of a bird. We need to have these two wings that help us soar together. We need to have our intellectual faculties, and we need to have our qualities of love and devotion. And these two wings have to learn to move together, to support one another, to fly together. Otherwise, if you tie one wing of a bird and it is just flapping, it will never be able to soar. But because Allah has created us in different mashrabs, in different temperaments, perhaps in this path I would say that intellect can bring you to the divine presence. And for most people, mashallah, that might be just enough. But at least for these friends, if you want to enter into the divine presence, you can't just think your way to God. You also need ashq. You also need to have that love tradition, because light can enter into light. Love can enter into love. So I think so many of the problems that we have is that we continue to read these stories not through our own categories, but through categories of modern Western Enlightenment tradition, which has a very clear hierarchy of rationality on top and religious stuff below that and superstition below that. And we know what that hierarchy looks like. I think part of what we have to do is to really recover our own sense of what is aql, what is ishq, what is the ruh, right? Aql for us was never here. Aql was here. So even when we speak about ulul bab, right, the people of understanding in the Quran, right, this is your lub. So the intellect for us was not 2 + 2 = 4. It was not, I think, therefore I am. Now that I'm not standing in my own university and I'm standing here, I can tell you this. I have never met a happy philosopher in my life. They wear black head to toe, they drink espresso all day, but I've never met a happy philosopher. Never. Why would you want to take guidance from someone who's not happy in this dunya, much less be happy in the akhirat to come? I will take my guidance from someone that is living with Ashq, is with the beloved here, and inshallah will be with the beloved there. And I think it's also important for us as we think about being intellectuals, which we are, and this is a university. We want to think about a way of being intellectual which is still connected to our heart knowledge. I think that project is still something new for us. And I think institutions like this have a crucial role in helping us discover a deeper way of knowing, a more spiritual epistemology.
Thank you. Mahmut Hocam.
I want to add my voice to the voice of the previous friends in greeting you and welcoming you and thanking you, my dear friend, Omid Jan, Khoshamadi. Thank you very much. I don't have any question, but just I would like to clarify one point for some friends who are listening. When you were saying that, especially the relationship between Kerem ile Aslı, Ferhad ile Shirin, Leyla ile Mejnun, you said that lore must be killed to be loved. We have to clarify it that this is a metaphorical dying, is not a physical dying, which in Tasawwuf we call it is fana, or fana fil ma'ashuk, or fana fil ishq itself.
Yes.
As you know very well that in another narration it says that من طلبني وجدني ومن وجدني أحبني ومن أحبني أشقني ومن أشقني أشقته ومن أشقته قتلته. When I fall in love with someone, I kill him. But at the end, as a reward, when I kill someone, I give myself to him. Yes. So this is fana.
Yes.
So thank you very much.
Alhamdulillah. That's very beautiful, my Jan. You know, when we look at this little miniature that I went past of Layla and Majnun, I completely agree with you. I think too much is made, especially in our poetry tradition, about fana, right? I went into fana, dar fana raftam, right? We don't talk enough about baqa. These are pairs, and there's a creative tension that is created between them. And, you know, of course, this notion of Layla and Majnun, whether we get this from Sadi, or we get this from Maulana, or we get this from Fuzuli, or we get this from some of the great other examples that we have, you know, we keep coming back to that story that we have from Maulana in the first daftar of Masnavi, of the great Harun al-Rashid, who has heard so many of these poems by Majnun, and he wants to see Layla, so he orders all the women to be brought to his court, and he's expecting one of them to just rise above, be the girl of unsurpassing beauty. And they all look pretty normal. They all look pretty ordinary. There's no one. And so he's like, is Layla here? Yes, Layla's here. And Layla steps forward, and she looks the same as all the other ones, right? She's not a supermodel, and she's just Layla. She's just Layla. And so he kind of looks at her and is like, are you Layla? And Layla says, I am Layla, but you are not Majnun. You are not Majnun. And Bishtaniya. And remember that when Sultan Veled writes his books, he says, I had to write a commentary on the Masnavi because people are stupid. He said, I had to write a commentary because they think there is a king and a maiden and a smith and a Layla and Majnun and an Arab and his wife and an Imam Ali. But he says, these are all us. they're all inside of us. So at least one very small way of reading it would be to say, what would it mean for us to have Layla qualities and Majnun qualities, to have lover qualities and beloved qualities, to experience Naz and Niyaz, and then to work on expressing our love glance towards one another, to see the beauty of Layla in one another, and to be seen as a Layla by one another. Aşk olsun.
Thank you. İnşallah. Omidjan, I hate to cut this beautiful gathering, but as usual, I'm the traffic policeman, and so I need to call our director, the Institute for Sufi Studies director, Professor Elif Erhan, on stage, so she has some words to tell you. Thank you.
Çok teşekkürler. May I keep you staying a little bit more, please? Would you? Thank you. Efendim, bu güzel günde bizlerle birlikte olduğunuz için çok teşekkür ederim.
First of all, thank you so much for being with us on that beautiful day. And our rector has a very limited time, yet he included us in his busy program, because within this month we will have very precious professors from Duke University. One of them is Professor Miriam Cook, who came for the first time to our university. She will have a very horizon broadening lecture series. She will present a literature study. Also, last April, we have hosted Professor Bruce Lawrence, which we are grateful for his work. He is also with us here. He didn't leave us alone. He accepted our invitation. Miriam Cook's work continues, but on the 21st, she will have her second public presentation with about Nazira Zeyneddin from Lebanon. She's a very important personality, and she has a very important speech. Also, Bruce Lawrence will deliver a speech about Islam and Sufism. I would like to thank to our dear friend, dear Professor Omid Safi, and also in order to present our thanks to them, I would like to invite our dear professor to the stage with all of our professors. With that beautiful family picture for Omid Safi, I think he feels much different things, because Bruce Lawrence is his PhD thesis professor, also his spiritual teacher. Cemal Nur Hoca is here. Can we have a family photo? Shall I name you all one by one?